Welcome back to Antiwar Radio. It's Chaos 92.7 FM in Austin, Texas, and our guest today is Scott Ritter. He's a former UN weapons inspector. He's the author of a whole bunch of books, including Target Iran, The Truth About the White House's Plans for Regime Change, and Waging Peace, The Art of War for the Anti-War Movement. You can find what he writes at truthdig.com and often at antiwar.com as well. We're featuring a brand new article by Mr. Ritter in the Viewpoint section today. Congressional hearings are needed to forestall an attack on Iran. Welcome back to the show, Scott.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm very happy to have you here, and, obviously with all the news from all different angles going crazy just in the last couple of weeks about Iran, I really appreciate the chance to get your insight here. I have to tell you, as the drumbeat is getting louder and louder and louder, for some reason, my gut is telling me that there's not going to be a war, and I guess the news that came out last week that Bush has at least taken half a step backwards and is willing to have some talks about maybe having some talks if only the Iranians will only stop expanding their nuclear program makes me feel like, hey, maybe Bush is backing down and we're not going to have a war after all. I know that sounds kind of silly when there's so much other news that would seem to indicate the contrary, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I share your gut feeling that the chances for war are actually being reduced, but not because of what you've said. I simply do not trust the Bush administration, the ideologues who populate the Bush administration, to be serious about meaningful diplomatic dialogue with Iran. The Bush administration has a long track record of using diplomacy as a smokescreen to position itself for conflict. I think we need to understand that at the same time the president has been making these announcements, these suggestions that there might be talks about having talks, the United States has been increasing its preparations for the potential of military conflict in the region, not just unilateral American attacks on Iran, but joint attacks or facilitating a unilateral Israeli attack. There are reports now that Israel has been operating out of U.S. bases in Iraq, at least setting up logistics preparations for the potential of having Iraqi airspace cleared for Israeli jets. Now, this is an odd thing to be happening if the president was serious about, lowering the chances of conflict by engaging in genuine diplomacy. There's never been genuine diplomacy engaged in by this administration when it comes to Iran, just as it was in the case of Saddam Hussein's Iraq. But, something did happen this week that I think changes the atmosphere tremendously, the landscape, and that is Iran eliminated any doubt as to what its response would be to a limited military strike. Up until now, some people, including myself, have been scratching their heads saying, what would Iran do if we simply bombed one or two Revolutionary Guard command sites, or if we limited an attack simply to the Natanz enrichment facility? And there was a hope that we could, contain the strike. I think Iran has eliminated speculation by engaging in their missile tests and announcing that if they are attacked, they will shut down the Strait of Hormuz, they will disrupt oil production, and they will unleash a massive bombardment of American troop concentrations in Iraq and Kuwait and elsewhere and attack Israel. Now that Iran is committed to this, it makes a limited military action impossible. If the United States and or Israel is contemplating military action against Iran, they now must accept that the initial attack must be massive and overwhelming, designed to neutralize or eliminate the Iranian ballistic missile threat. And this, frankly speaking, is a virtual impossibility in the time frame left for the Bush administration. They have not positioned themselves to carry out this kind of massive strike. So in many ways, the Iranian action, I think, has made the possibility of war now more remote. I mean, we still have the rhetoric, we still have the chest thumping, et cetera, but the reality is that no responsible military planner can consider a limited military strike against Iran anymore from this point on. They must understand that any military action against Iran has to be massive and overwhelming, and this is something that the Bush administration is not prepared to do at this point in time.
Meaning the Navy and the Air Force just aren't prepared to do it.
The Navy and the Air Force have not positioned themselves to initiate and sustain this kind of strike. And it's not just the Navy and the Air Force anymore, because in order to secure the Strait of Hormuz, you have to talk about not just putting aircraft over Iranian airspace, but you have to put boots on the ground. The Marine Corps and Army Special Operations Forces will have to operate on the ground to clear out the surface-to-surface anti-shipping missile sites. American commandos will have to operate in the depth of the Iranian landmass to interdict, ballistic missile and ballistic missile launch potential. And so this isn't simply flying airplanes over Iran anymore. This is about committing thousands of, if not tens of thousands, of American troops to combat operations on the ground in Iran. And this is a completely different picture than what has been talked about before. Now that Iran has committed that it will unleash a massive missile barrage if attacked, the only option now for the United States, if it wants to indeed attack Iran, is to preempt the Iranians with our own massive military assault, which will be inclusive of ground forces, and we're just not positioned to do that. It doesn't mean that we can't do that, but the Bush administration at this point in time is not positioned to do that, and in order to get ourselves to the position where we can carry out this huge airstrike combined with this considerable ground action, troops will have to be moved, money will have to be allocated, Congress will have to be briefed, and I just don't see Congress going along with this. Now you combine this with the OPEC Director General or Secretary General saying, if you attack Iran, all bets are off. There will be a limitless expansion in the price of oil, $300, $500, $1,000 a barrel. The American economy will not survive this. The European economy will not survive. I just can't see Congress allowing this to happen, especially since no one can demonstrate that Iran poses a threat to the United States, Israel, or the rest of the world that warrants this kind of action. Israel can sit here and talk all they want about Hamas and Hezbollah and terrorist attacks that kill 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people, and as horrible as that is, I don't think anybody in the world say, well, we will commit economic suicide to help Israel resolve its problems with Hamas and Hezbollah.
Well,
understanding that any attack on Iran will not resolve Israel's problems with Hamas and Hezbollah, but only exacerbate them.
Well, here's the problem, though, is everything that you're saying here, this reminds me of what you said before the Iraq War. These are what we call reality-based arguments. And, Scott, this is the same discussion that we've been having for years now, that reality, in terms of economic problems, in terms of backlash against our soldiers in Iraq, and on down the list, the possible consequences of war with Iran have always been, a deal breaker, seemingly, and yet that hasn't seemed to have much to do with the argument. It's sort of like last November when all of America's intelligence agencies said they don't have a nuclear weapons program, and yet we still talk about we have to preempt their nuclear weapons program, or our politicians do.
No, look, I'm not disagreeing. I always said that the fact that the Bush administration is populated by ideologues who believe that America can generate its own reality, a new reality, and that they are dismissive of arguments that are based in what they call old reality. I mean, I think Ron Suskind came up with this argument when he wrote his book. This is a reality check for us as the American people. We're dealing with an administration that is not logical, that derives its national security policy formulation not from reality or a sense of responsibility, but based upon, adherence to certain ideologically based principles of global domination. But the difference here is that in the past, when we talked about Iraq, we talked about theoretical. We postulated the problems that could emerge. I think today we have enough data that we're no longer talking about the theoretical, we're talking about the probable. And oil is no longer at $40 a barrel. The American population has to deal with the reality that oil is going through the roof, and so it's not theoretical the prices will go up. We now know they will go up, and we know what the consequences will be. And I do think that this economic reality check, this gut check, will compel Congress to take a look at what it's allowing this administration to do. I mean, we'll find out in the near term. Congress is considering resolutions at the House and Senate level calling for a naval blockade of Iran.